are you ready now to proceed for your presentation? May I ask our MC to introduce our explanatory speaker? May I call on I have a new partner in the afternoon, no? I will introduce to you Miss Justine Feliz Sarte, no?
Right, thank you,
From
sir.
MSU IIT.
Right, thank you, Sir Mix. Right, hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'll be taking over this afternoon, so Sir Mix could have his lunch break also. Right, so good afternoon, everyone. Once again, I hope you all had a hearty meal and had the chance to recharge at least during your working lunch break. Right, so if you haven't, you can also go ahead. So welcome back to the sixth Politics and Culture Conference of the Social Ethics Society. Joining you this afternoon, I am Justin Flazarta, a senior student at Mindanao State University Iligan Institute of Technology, studying BS Philosophy, major in Applied Ethics. And I'm delighted to guide you through the next segment of our conference. Right, so I'm very much optimistic for the upcoming discourse. I'm sure it will be stimulating given that we have a fascinating lineup of topics ahead. So it features insightful speakers who will be discussing uh, uh, like intricate topics on different contexts, which will be intertwining politics and culture, of course. So I won't be prolonging this introduction. Let's go ahead and get started. Right. To kickstart the discussions for this afternoon's lectures, allow me to introduce our fifth and last plenary speaker. He is a research professor at the Center for Ethics in Science and Technology, Department of Philosophy at the Chulalongkorn University in Bangkok, Thailand. Additionally, he is a research fellow at the Asia Institute Convergence and 3E program in Seoul, South Korea. Lastly, he has held teaching and research positions at not only in the Mahidol University, Sirira Medical Center in Bangkok, Thailand, but also in Sungkyunkwan Fan University in South Korea, and the University of Virginia, Charlottesville, Virginia. So it is my pleasure to introduce to everyone our plenary speaker, none other than Dr. Layne Hartsell. So let us all fix our attention to the screen as Dr. Hartsell imparts her knowledge on war and peace.
Yeah, thank you, Justine, and also to Manolito, to the deans, to Ryan, Mabalok, the other faculty, and to the students and others there. I see there's a lot of people here, and also on Facebook. I heard that this Zoom was full to get into, and including yesterday with Professor Gichiro's talk on war or on peace. So in the case of Gichiro-san, he's speaking about the speculative aspects of peace, and then also maybe how that could be applied. In my case today, while he and I have been writing about Buddhist philosophy and peace, I want to talk about, or when I was asked to speak, and I was asked for a title, when I was asked to speak about war and peace and asked for a title, I said, well, how about war and peace? Because it was almost an impulsive reflection on Tolstoy's War and Peace. They're from Yasnaya, Polyana in Russia, which is just north there of Ukraine. So I want to talk about the war and the Eurasia, which I think is a very, very serious situation. And the title I added was From Uruk, U-R-U-K, Mesopotamia to Hiroshima, and with a visit to Yasnaya, Polyana, and the modern world in the last 150 years. Yasnaya, Polyana is where Tolstoy lived. So reflecting on the abundance of both war and peace at this moment, if you look on social media, for example, or regular media, and while it's horrific for those who are in the wars, I'm not speaking directly to families and people who are suffering greatly. What I'm looking at today is the kind of a macro direction and this kind of large picture and general problem, and also about how destructive war can be. We could also explore what does peace mean, but I think what peace means, as I'm using it here, is that when I say war and peace, I say war and war. It should be heard in that way. The concern of this specter led to a series of papers or articles that I wrote with German physician Alexander Krabbe, who's an anti-nuclear activist and journalist and physician in Germany, in Berlin. And the concern that we had was another global conflagration and the potential use of nuclear weapons. Certainly, that certainly always gets attention, and it should at this time in history. In the spring of, so a little background, in the spring of 2021, I went to Berlin at the height of the pandemic. I was only going to go for a brief trip, but I ended up staying and doing research in psychiatry related to children and the stress of the pandemic. And we also gave a lecture on that topic while I was there. But one afternoon, we were strolling along the Havel. The Havel is the famous river there near Spandau. And we were talking about this troubling global macro situation. So this is 3 years ago, at about the same time as right now. Pandemic, illness, death, broken supply chains, unprecedented economic collapse, ongoing decade-long stimulus, and so forth. And then this kind of chaotic stock market and this looming crisis that everybody was going through, or most everybody, I'd say. But that was a fairly mild pandemic as things go. We knew these conditions also could lead to wars, looking at history. So we allowed history to talk to us for a moment. And the confusions in the media landscape, as you know, at this time is probably when in history the confusion went out of control as far as social dialogue and media, and people at home, and everybody has phones and they're talking and putting out all kinds of information. So this whole thing is going on and amplified by the pandemic. Obviously, there's a lot of illiteracy on media and science and history. And so the media sphere had degraded into dystopia of unsubstantiated and uncorroborated data, as the virologists and the public health experts are trying to actually get data and information in the face of pandemic and the social breakdown. But a lot of the information was virtually useless for information and knowledge, and mass hysteria set in. And this is not uncommon. I mean, if you look at history, when pandemics would come in, the same kind of thing. And I mean, all kinds of gods and goddesses are causing this, or the government's doing something or whatever. And so you see this just in a more blatant view, because we can see online. We can watch it online. The pandemic's effects are particularly devastating for urban populations, as is in history, because when a pandemic would come through, it would empty out urban centers. So it'd be a great de-urbanization event when pandemics would hit. And then, of course, wars and that kind of stuff would follow along. Today, even after this pandemic, there's poor industrial design, as there was before. So how would people be able to, I mean, really, COVID-19 was something like 10 times stronger than the flu, which isn't very serious, but serious enough for people that are immunocompromised or older. But anyway, with the current infrastructure that we have, it's not built for biological crisis, right? So people couldn't get to work. You could, if you have people put into the small subways, and then this virus spreads and so forth. Okay, so you've got all of that going on, and there's other inevitabilities related to biology in the urban system that also haven't been addressed, like with poor industrial design, such as pollution, soil, air, water, bacteria, viruses, shared immune commons, and all of that. We're creating some very, very serious conditions. We look at this kind of stuff as researchers, as physicians, and as Alex is a physician and so forth. The other part is that if you notice, the urban systems are not built within harmony with nature. And I want that to be an underlying aspect of my talk with you today. The conditions that we wrote in a technical paper called For a New Biopolitics, bio, of course, meaning life, but politics meaning cities. So politics are the affairs of the power structures and how they're shared in cities. That's what politics is about, going back to Aristotle. In the case of COVID-19, well, it was profound for a lot of people. As I said, it would be nothing like something like MERS, for example, or another kind of respiratory illness that has a 10 or 12% mortality rate. Then it would be very, very noticeable, serious, and the entire structure wouldn't even be a chance for medical personnel to respond to. Uh, Virologists are watching this kind of thing 24/7. There are constant viruses and so forth coming up out of nature. And so there's this kind of war against nature going on, with civilization encroaching onto nature, we say as biologists. And then out of that come these viruses that normally nature would have barriers in place for this stuff to occur. So this is in the background for war that I think that's happening today. And continued energy demand, mining, consumption, development, and so forth. So if you think of like, are you still able to hear me there? Or okay, if you can't hear me, just ask me to repeat it or something. Okay, Justine.
Right.
So with the continued increase in consumption and mining and development and all that, think about a place like Lagos, Nigeria, or the Pearl River Delta. These places already have tens of millions of people in the vicinity, in the region, and the cities are concentrating more and more to where, I mean, perhaps you could have cities like these kind of megapolitron type cities with 100 million people, for example, within, say, I don't know, a few decades or something, if it were to keep going like it is. But of course, there's physical barriers like biology, for example. By around 2050, the UN says that upwards of around 70% of people will live in cities. So you can see the trajectory. But again, I say that there's physical barriers like pandemic, for example, that probably would slow a lot of that down. Therefore, in this conversation that we had along the Havel River 3 years ago, it was more of a concern of these crumbling systems that we have that are core to civilization and the escalation of global conflict. We didn't know anything, of course. I mean, this is 3 years ago, right? So we didn't have any idea really what was coming. Is just looking at reality is far too complex to even, I don't know, almost put your foot in front of your next foot for the next moment. Afterwards, I traveled to Phnom Penh in Cambodia to do some work in economics, and then on back home. I was looking at small to medium enterprise, but I had continued to reflect and to exchange with Alex on this. And I guess this is around October of 2021. And he wrote, he was sending me some research and information about rising tensions along the border of Ukraine and Russia. Now, that area has already had, quite a bit of conflict, and Russian troops were built up and so forth. NATO along the other sides, there's NATO countries now, Finland and Poland and Romania and so forth. But at that time, Finland and Ukraine weren't in NATO or anything. So I was looking at the CIA reports. These were out in the regular media, and I thought, I don't think Russia and the U.S. and Europe are going to get involved in a shooting war, because there would be quite a massive entanglement. The war is going to drag on for a long time and so forth. That was my initial response. But Alex kept sending me information, and around that time, Newsweek, it's a popular periodical in the United States, reported on December 9th that the Republican Senator Roger Wicker, who is the head of the Senate Armed Services Committee, had stated that we don't rule out first use nuclear action and American troops on the ground while speaking about Russia and Ukraine. Specifically, of course, the Russians responded immediately, and there was a lot of pushback and criticism in the United States. And he walked back his statement saying that he hadn't been speaking specifically about that region. I think this is on video. You can look it up. Later, or just before that, just a month before that, the U.S. had reactivated the military base at Mainz-Ketzel, Germany. If you might recall, that's the site of the Pershing missile headquarters. And those were the intermediate range U.S. nuclear weapons back from about 35 years ago that were discontinued in 1991. But just before that, there was the ratification of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Treaty, one of the most incredible developments of humanity ever. This is a true jewel, this treaty, and that was around 87, 88. By 1991, they started to dismantle those weapons. And then in 2002, President George W. Bush, unilaterally abandoned the anti-ballistic missile treaty, the ABM treaty from Moscow in 1972. And since then, there have been a number of, all along, the Russians have been protesting. That should be in the background. There were a number of actions in the region, such as U.S. NATO placement of missiles at the airport in Romania and also in Poland. And then there was Maidan in 2014. So in 2014, there's the political change and so forth going on. It looked like a coup from the outside. And both, of course, Russia and the U.S. both are involved in these political situations. But it ended up with a lot of deaths and suffering. The U.S. Representative there, what is her name? Victoria Nuttall, I think that's her name, was there was a leak on, I guess, a video or a tape where she was talking about what they wanted to happen. So what the United States wanted to happen there, what they were making happen. So we know that there was an involvement. The situation there is one where NATO is designed to project U.S. power into the continent, into Europe. And I'm quoting NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, who's now everyone knows from being on television. Well, this was also on television talking to President Trump in President Trump's first term. And the reactivation of the site of the Pershing missile headquarters was also about the hypersonic Dark Eagle missiles. So all of this was, I was looking at this information at the time, and we wrote this article, or actually an essay, and we sent it up to the Korea Times in Seoul, and shortly it was published in the Korea IT Times. And since then, we've published a number of articles that are going to be in a book coming out probably after the first of the year. So the news of this deployment of the Dark Eagle missiles, so this is at Mainz-Ketzel, Germany, the Pershing headquarters. These missiles are very fast and they can be nuclear capable. With these on European soil, after President Trump had abandoned the INF treaty, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, just in 2018, and Russia had unsuccessfully called for a vote to reinstate the treaty, the tensions were already high. A lot of people probably didn't even recognize a lot of this going on. Maybe Maidan 2014 was in the news, but these are the major events that were going on during that time, particularly since 2014. So basically, on December 13th in 2021, the Deputy Foreign Minister from Russia, the Russian Federation, Sergei Ryabkov, stated that Russia may be forced to act if the West declined to put a moratorium on intermediate range nuclear forces. So Russia responded in that way, and they said that it could lead to their deployment of their own intermediate range missiles. Now you can see the escalation that's starting to happen. The US backed off, discontinued the Dark Eagle missiles. Around the same time, the president, this is December, so we're around Christmas in 2021. The prime minister of Norway, different than Stoltenberg. So Jens Stoltenberg is the general secretary of NATO, but the prime minister of Norway, I forget his name at the time, he remarked in a speech that there's likely to be war for Christmas. And of course, Europe immediately is, what's going on. A lot of people knew that there was a problem, but to hear this stated by the prime minister was of course serious. And of course, now it's history. Within 2 months, Russia and Europe were at war. Russia invading Ukraine this time. Now, in all of this, it needs to be noted. Let's talk a little bit about ancient history. That the area of Ukraine, you could call it a bioregion, I call it a bioregion, has a long record concerning human organization, human social modes of organization, going back at least to 25,000 years ago, 15,000 to 25,000 years ago, where human beings were starting to form something in this area. And it's a long time ago, so I just say something. But we know at around 7,000 to 6,000 years ago, there were these nested villages. So there were large-scale nested villages that they called these megasites. They're called Tripilla catalytic megasites. They're in the forest steppes. So this very rich forest area, ancient forest, and there's these sites at Nebelivka and Veselikut. Those are two megasites where people were already forming. They weren't cities, but they were settlements, and I just call them these nested megasite places. It was rich in land and what they called Chernozyms, or the richest soil in Europe, some of the richest soil in Europe. And as I said, the forest and other resources, and you can only imagine the abundance of that time. Artistic endeavors indicate intellectual life, as do larger structures at these megasites, apparently used for meeting places and depository systems of specific kinds of houses and so forth. So the reason I put this in there is because of agroforestry and bioregion, and this area has been known to be a very rich place for millennia. Today, it's a place of war with massive destruction. That is an important history to remember. The Russian state was formed far later in 882 AD. And in a recent interview, the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, argued similarly on chronology. We were here first, but for the Russian state and its sovereignty. So sovereignty and the megasites are two different forms. A city with sovereignty and control over hinterland is different than just a regular, the non-civilized nested megasites that you'd think of. Okay. Basically the modern, so he's making a modernist argument within a Russian traditionalist perspective. Now, Putin's perspective is a traditionalist perspective, which is the sovereignty. And basically, we conquered it. It's ours. We own it. It's similar to any state that says this. Aside from such history, the legitimate concerns of the Russian people, who have endured centuries of attack, death, and destruction at the hands of Europeans as modernity came about. Now we're in the 19th century here, as all of that biodiversity, timber, mines, and all of that was coveted by basically everybody, including today. So if you listen to the guns in Tchaikovsky's 1812 overture, those guns and the kettle drums are these battles when Russia defended itself against France successfully. Now, the Germans did the same under the control of Nazism more than 100 years later, wanting living space, or what they called Lebensraum, required the reduction of the region from tens of millions of people down to about 50% of the original. so that German stock could resettle there. So this is what we call settler state colonialism. And this matched the same thing on the steps of the American model and the breadbasket of what we call Turtle Island, which is today's North America, the United States. And the Nazi leadership developed their own plans based on the American model. George Frederick Hegel, the great Russian philosopher, in his philosophy of history, wrote that Native American cultures, such as in Mexico, for example, it must expire as soon as civilization approached it. Because to Hegel, the state was the spirit. And this is the manifestation, the ultimate manifestation of the spirit, and that the primitive cultures should be decimated and exterminated. And Ayn Rand, this one of the famous philosophers, heard someone talking about libertarianism earlier. One of the great libertarian philosophers of the market also said the same thing as Hegel about primitive cultures. She gave a lecture, in fact, in 1974 at the military academy at West Point, saying basically the same thing. They don't own the land, get off of it, kill them all, basically. George Washington wanted to spread the U.S. out as a nascent empire into the hemisphere, controlling North and South America, with the characteristic extermination and scorched earth policies and genocidal speech. The model's not new. So basically, I'm establishing the state model here. I tend to think the United States is probably the best model, but it has to be worked. It has to be made to work. But what I'm giving here is a macro view of how the system operates. And you'll hear John Mearsheimer in the background here. So what is new about current conditions is this rapid regression of this expansion of industrial level warfare that began about 100 years ago or so, and this greater dexterity of engineering and technology that's directed towards destruction and different, each point in history. And today it's arrived at a position, and this is a key point, that there's too little space or too little time for political de-escalation in the event of, say, the military experts, the commanders who are making the decisions to determine what they're looking at coming in from the data. All right. So when you have to remember, they only have maybe 10 minutes or less, maybe less now, to make decisions. And there's all kinds of stuff that can go wrong, like, say, computer malfunctions or something like this. The Russians, being well aware of this history of Eurasia in the current security situation, it's plain to see, but the West seems largely oblivious. While we live in a time that sees nuclear armed states in near direct confrontation, and right now there are wars going around 3 nuclear power plants, one in Russia, one in Ukraine, Zaporizhzhia, and then the one in Israel. That's 3 nuclear power plants that wars are going on around at this time. This was never supposed to happen, according to the atomic physicists. This is the path towards thermonuclear war. We think that such an escalation could come about with a series of miscalculations and misinterpretations of real or imagined threat. When under pressure of extreme conventional industrial scale war, which is what we have right now. So when you see on the news or the Twitter or X or whatever, and you see the Gaza, for example, and you see just a complete destruction, this industrial scale war has become like a daily drama, I guess you'd say, online with real people. Now, there have also been a number of near misses of thermonuclear war deterred by luck over the past, say, I don't know, 40 or 50 years, such as Able Archer in 1981 that almost went into thermonuclear war. Now, for modernity, say the 19th century that I discussed a little bit in the beginning with World War I, so you had the French Revolution that sparked a lot of hope and democratic movements. Okay, so we're in the late 18th century, early 19th century, moving up into modernity. But then the French Revolution was overshadowed by the state and social contracts that followed, and that led to the Napoleonic Wars. Okay, so then there's Tolstoy and all of that. That period inspired the War and Peace, and it serves not only as a narrative but a profound philosophical dialogue, questioning civilization's propensity for violence and destruction. Um, and it's a dialogue that, despite however advanced we think we are today, remains relevant. When considering the Donbass area, there's Tula and Yasnaya Polyana, as I said, just north of that, where Tolstoy was writing. Now, of course, I should say something about patriarchy, because that whole book and everything came out of patriarchy. But I'm just talking about the War and Peace at the moment. This rapid escalation of the industrial warfare that we see today is it has that like a kind of there's almost like a metaphysical commitment to engineering and technology, right? It's not really science. Science is a way for us to how we come to know things, scientific method and so forth. But this commitment to engineering and technology with this rapid scale up, uh, particularly in industrial capitalism, which is highly productive, it creates, I think, the conditions or the political conditions such that these weapons are being used. Apologists call it progress and necessary. In fact,
Excuse me,
one guy
Dr.
who used to
Hartsell.
be, yes,
My apologies for the interruption, sir, but I would just like to remind you that you have 5 minutes to conclude your presentation.
yeah, you can just hold up your hand 5 minutes. I got you there.
All right.
So apologists, yeah, and this is going towards the end here. So I was talking about there's this threat from the industrial scale destruction, and there's a hypocrisy and self-deception, of course, going on. Apologists call it progress and necessary. Liberal democracy is the end of history, and we just need to adjust things and everything will be okay. Our better angels. And then there are others that revel in hatred and mass slaughter, that God or gods have literally directed us to do this. Civilization just has to be this way, and so forth and so on are the explanations. That dichotomy that exists in real conflicts, such as in Eurasia, calls for sanity, I think, and a neutral zone, such as the Minsk II, which was in place, or they tried to get into place, or something like the Austrian or Swiss model. And overall, we suggest a general responsive biorealism based on the scientific explanations of today, and a durable bioregional fund on the land for Eastern Ukraine that's reminiscent of the Norwegian Sovereignty Fund. So instead of, I think first of all, you've got to stop shooting. Okay, so you want to try to get people to stop shooting, and to get some kind of negotiation in place that both sides can agree to a neutral zone. So basically back off, and open up the area. But there's still the issue of those minerals there. So you've got probably just in that eastern part of Ukraine, there's probably 10 trillion in minerals. And those are needed for all of the fancy bright green gadgets and green technology and all of that. There's still got to be a way to deal with that, or civilizations are just going to go and do what they do, which is exactly that. So that's why I say there has to be not only stop the shooting, but we also argue that within that Australian, Swiss, or Norwegian model, that there be an actual bioregional fund that highly regulates that area for timber and minerals and all of that. So to sum up, basically, I think that with the global community already grappling with trauma of nuclear disasters like Fukushima and Chernobyl, I think that those at least should be enough to awaken people to the fact that there's already war going on around nuclear power plants, Israel, Ukraine, and Russia, and that there's escalation going on within the war, but also there are solutions that have already been on the table. the ABM missile treaty, what is it, the INF treaty, and so forth. There's the Wilderness Act in the United States, the Clean Water Act, and on and on. There are huge successes, and I think that the positivity or the optimism can come from people working on those kinds of specific areas. So if people are asking what they can do, I think that is the thing to do. I'll take some questions if we have time.
Right, everyone, the floor is now open for questions. You may raise your hand, virtual hand, or type in the chat box. We will be entertaining a few questions.
Let me ask the first question, Dr. Layne. Actually, I am bothered with this actually long time ago. But aside from, of course, there are existing occurring wars in the planet. But here in the Philippines, we can feel the tension of there used to be some kind of a potential emerging warfare that involves China, the Philippines, and America, uh, involving the territory in China, no? The China Sea that we also refer to as West Philippine Sea. And I do not, I am not really sure how will I apply this to the concept of bioregionalism, but um, for the Philippines, which is shall we say a smaller country, physically also very small because of its archipelagic nature. Um, and then we are also turned between two masters, no, between America, which we have a colonial root, and recently China is also an ally, particularly with the previous administration. And Filipinos actually are um, in the dilemma whether what should be the correct decision for Filipinos, whether should we assert our territorial rights of the West Philippine Sea, and we have the support of the United States of America, very much willing to support the Philippines. On the other hand, China is very near to our territory, and we are very much afraid of maybe military invasion. So, what do you think? This might be concerning a little bit of international relations and the Philippine government, but can you give us your insights on this concern?
Well, thank you for the statement and the question. It would be something that I'd be interested in talking if we were, say, at dinner or something, but I have no ability or uh, to even talk about it. I just see the news. I hear what people in the Philippines are saying. But when the fear of I do know one thing: China's not going to invade Philippines. Okay, so I don't think you need to worry about that. I don't think the fear level should be at that high, at that level. But I think that with the United States and China there with the navies and air forces and so forth, yes, it's serious. It's serious, sure.
All right, do we have any more questions?
Can I?
Thank you so much, Mix, for that question.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Hello.
Dominador Pagliawan. You're recognized.
Okay. Sir Layne, thank you very much for the nice presentation. You just mentioned that there's no possibility for China invading the Philippines. And it seems like you are quite sure that it's not going to happen. um, can you explain a little bit, please? How can you say that China will not go to the extent of invading our country? Thank you.
Yes, well, I hope everybody accepts that when we're talking, we're speaking with very minimal information, even if we're experts, and that we're speaking within a scientific understanding and not, I don't have like, I don't go into meditation and come up with some kind of magic or something, or I don't have some kind of magic. But there are two things. One is the U.S. has those Polaris subs there, and those are armed with nuclear weapons. It could eliminate China within a few weeks. And China also has nuclear weapons. That's one reason. That's the main reason. There is another reason, though. Culturally, China and India, particularly, this region has not been particularly a bellicose, violent culture type region. Different than say Europe in Bolivia or something like that in the past. So when you think about the silver mines in Bolivia or something, nothing like that coming from China. There were wars, so there's culture, and then of course there's the actual protection of thermonuclear weapons that are in Asia, and these countries haven't pointed at each other. I don't know if any weapons are there on the Philippine Islands from the United States, but anyway, there are weapons there in that region.
Yeah, that's the funny thing because we want to assert our rights, institutional rights and territorial rights. However, we have very minimal military capacity. As a matter of fact, our marine vehicles, our navy is very old lane, uh, so to say. We are basically inequipped to oppose these powers.
That's true. The Philippines wouldn't win a war against China, a naval war. No. But again, I think these are more like for an academic conversation, and I don't know enough. I mean, these kind of things. I mean, they're obvious, but the other details be better to ask somebody that really knows about it.
All
Thank you,
right.
Layne.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for that engaging discussion, sir. And thank you so much to Sir Mix and Sir Dominador Pagliawan for asking questions and for your participation. All right. Thank you, Dr. Layne Hartsell, for that insightful presentation, especially, anchoring on biopolitics, specifically on the international political landscape in relation to, wars going on in like nuclear power plants. And, essentially, even if these things are happening, how peace may still be achieved in forms of course, neutral negotiations, right? So as we reflect on what Dr. Hartsell has shared, let's look forward to our fifth batch of paper presentations for this conference.